Every year, 10 writers and 10 audio makers are chosen from across Australia. They're given financial support and access to professional development opportunities, and are each matched with a dedicated mentor. Through these mentorships, tomorrow's outstanding emerging voices are steered and supported by today's storytelling icons. Tonight, we're joined by Next Chapter recipient Mia Nie, her mentor Sarah Howell, Signal Boost participant Cherie Minniecon, and her mentor Timmah Ball, as we discuss the varied forms of support for emerging writers and podcasters and the unique qualities of mentorships. So let me introduce our first pair. We're going to hear a little bit from each pair, and then we'll all kind of come back together at the end. And I'll ask us a few questions for each pair to start us off. So first up, we have Mia and Sarah. Mia Nie is a Chinese-Australian comic artist, zine maker, and award-nominated ex-poet. Her work explores the complexities, contradictions, and deeply felt desires of transgender subjectivity. She's passionate about understanding queer history and imagining queer futures. Mia is a 2020 Next Chapter recipient and is currently working on her first graphic novel. Hi, Mia.
Hello.
And next to Mia is her mentor, Sarah Howell. Sarah makes comics, teaches comics, and develops projects that advocate for her art form. Her projects include Home Cooked Comics Festival and Squish Face Comic Studio, a co-share workspace for cartoonists and illustrators. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
So let's just start off by asking you each a little bit, or the two of you a little bit about mentorships and working together. Mia, can you tell us a bit about the work that you submitted to the Next Chapter, what stage it was at when you entered it and what you were hoping for, and where it's at now? We're sort of halfway through your year in the scheme.
Right, sure. I'd love to. That's my favorite hobby, is talking about my book. So the book that I'm making, it's my debut graphic novel. It's called Samsara Dreamin'. It's narrative-driven. It's, I guess, kind of like dark fantasy. And when I submitted the excerpt that I did to the Next Chapter, I'd been working on it for around about 8 months, but it was still very, very, very early on in terms of the overall development of it. I had created this sort of 30-page excerpt of it as a standalone zine that I printed actually 2 weeks before COVID hit. So I sold it for all of 2 weeks before I had to stop doing that. So I submitted this essentially because I had it ready to go, but it wasn't actually that that indicative of, I think, what I wanted for the rest of the book. But at that point, I actually hadn't really had a good formulation of what I did want the rest of the book to be like. It's developed a lot since then, especially with Sarah's mentorship. So yeah, it's come a long way.
And when you were applying for Next Chapter, what were you looking for? What did you need and want to work on in your craft and in that project?
Well, for this particular project, I knew the biggest thing that I needed was time. Time and support, really. I also really wanted editorial feedback. It's the first time that I've really tried to make something that was directly narrative-driven at anything close to the scale that I'm making it at. For reference, I think the longest comics that I'd previously made were around about 20 to 30 pages, and this one is in the vicinity of 400 to 500, so it's a much, much, much bigger scale of work than anything that I'd previously attempted. So that's what I was really hoping for out of the mentorship aspect of the program, and what I really wanted out of the rest of it was essentially money and time and space. I wanted another year, basically, where I was being financially supported and I didn't really have to worry about making rent and all of those things.
So when you were weighing up particularly the work and the development that you wanted and the editorial feedback that you wanted, what was it about that drew you to Sarah? And maybe tell us a little bit about the process of, thinking about a mentor and how you went about that.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
I'm fascinated to find out.
Are you? You don't know at all? You have no-
I don't think we really talked about
Yeah, I guess we haven't.
how you chose me in particular.
Well, I mean, we just talked just then about how we met in a Zoom class last year, right? So, I mean, do you want to talk about that?
I was a ring-in. Bernard Callio was sick, so I was asked to fill in for Bernard, teaching at the University of Melbourne's graphic narrative course.
Yeah. So the graphic narratives course was, so I'm doing my master's degree at the University of Melbourne. That's in creative writing, editing, and publishing. They have a very good graphic narratives course. It's taught by Elizabeth McFarlane, who's currently my thesis supervisor. So last year when all the classes switched over to online, I think there was one class where Bernard couldn't make it, so Sarah was called in. That was the first time that I had ever sort of interacted with Sarah, that we'd ever met. I think I was very, well, I don't think, this is like my experience. My experience was, I was very impressed by Sarah's expertise and her ability to just talk about comics and comics form. I was impressed by her ability to sort of like talk about her choices, especially formally and like visually and artistically, and how she approached her craft, and also like talked about examples of other comics that you were sort of like bringing in as samples. So I think, and I had that in mind, and then I wasn't applying for Next Chapter until a few months after that. But you came to mind very early on when I was thinking about people in Melbourne and Australia, like comic artists that I really wanted to tap for that kind of experience and expertise and ability to sort of like talk about craft and form.
Out of curiosity, what is the scope for choosing your mentor? Like, addressing this to the Wheeler Centre here, to Veronica. A mentee, can they choose, does it have to be Victorians they choose from, or?
They can choose anybody. Like, we really encourage people to come with as many ideas as they want, and it's a really fun process. It's a process where we at the Wheeler Centre sit down with each Next Chapter recipient and sort of have the conversation, like, what do you want from a mentor? Do you have any ideas? Do you want someone in the same state so you can meet face to face? Do you want someone who's going to give you heaps of editorial feedback, or someone who's just like more of a kind of, rah-rah cheerleader for you? What do you need? Do you need someone who's going to kick your butt and like kind of, put the hard word on you? And we talk about all those different aspects with them, and then often the writers will have some ideas, and we might offer some ideas as well. And Mia was the first graphic novelist recipient of the Next Chapter, we're entering its 4th year now, and Mia was the first graphic novelist. So I just remember having this huge list of graphic novelists, because we were like, oh my God, there's so many amazing people, and we've never had the opportunity to tap anyone before. But I also remember Mia coming back very quickly and saying, Sarah.
Yeah, you were my first pick.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear.
Yeah, but we did have that conversation for a couple of weeks and a few exchanges about like mentorship, and because the scope of it was really broad, so I guess narrowing it down was sort of this like, well, I mean, I just wasn't sure what was or wasn't feasible and viable. And at that point, I was also open to sort of like mentor suggestions from people who didn't make comics. And then I kind of closed that avenue pretty quickly, because I wanted people who specifically knew about comics, because I wanted to be able to talk about like the specificities of comics and comics form. So yeah, and I definitely wanted somebody in the same state, because I really like face-to-face meetings, and that has turned out to be fruitful so far.
I think it has been a strength of our relationship.
Absolutely,
so far.
Yeah, the fact that we can actually meet like in person, and we look at it physically, and because comics especially are so much about the way that you read them, because they are a visual format. So I think the visual experience of looking at comics on paper physically, which is what I'm trying to design this comic for, is very different to if we were just looking at it on a screen, talk about it on a screen. So I think the fact that we're sort of able to meet in person and then talk over the pages that I'm doing on paper and then looking at them, I think that's been really valuable to me.
Out of curiosity, I know I've had this conversation with other artists who have been thinking about getting, comic artists that have been thinking about getting mentors. Often the difficulty for comics creators is that you might know someone who has an expertise in the visual side of things.
Right.
And you might know someone who has expertise in the sort of story, structural side of things. So it's like you kind of sometimes, a lot of the conversations have been around, I feel like I need someone for both
Yeah.
aspects of the project. And for you, you've got Elizabeth.
I do.
for
So I'm
that more
very
structural-
blessed this year.
Yeah.
I'm really spoiled for assistance. Yeah.
'Cause I was quite clear in my original email. I was
Yeah.
like, my strength is not the structural stuff.
Yeah.
My strength is kind of the physicality and the visuals. So I was very glad that you had that support for the structural side
Yeah.
of things and that more the story side of things with Elizabeth.
Yeah, and I had the discussion with Elizabeth as well when we first started, I guess, this thesis project together. Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the kind of practicalities of what the mentorship looks like and what your meetings look like, and how much of it is kind of editorial feedback and how much of it is maybe bigger picture conversations. Like took us through, your first meeting or two and what you were kind of grappling with and focusing on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we just had our most recent meeting yesterday.
Yes.
So it's fresh in my mind, certainly. I don't know about you. You
Yeah,
might
no,
have
it's
forgotten.
pretty fresh. So we've had 3 meetings so far. And the first one was February or something like that. We met quite early, like January or February.
I feel like we met very early. We met like 2 weeks into the year or something. Like very
Yeah.
early on, and then I didn't see you again until after I got back from Sydney, from New South Wales. Because as part of the Next Chapter program, we went up to Varuna Ryder's house up in Katoomba. But yeah, after I got back from that, I saw you, and then that was the second meeting. And then our third one was yesterday.
The first one was just kind of feeling things out and how we wanted to communicate.
Yeah.
And was kind of in that weird COVID time. Too.
Yeah.
I think we were both a bit like, can we even meet in a cafe?
Yeah,
You know?
that was like right at the start of the year, right? So that was like right after the long lockdown ended and people were really starting to just come out of their homes again for the first time in like 120 days. We met at Footscray Community Arts Centre. I think our meetings are I think that the setting is very, okay, I guess we'll lay the scene. So the settings are generally pretty informal, but I think the way that we're talking about things is pretty strict, or rather it's pretty like motivated, we don't sort of just like waffle around for like 2 hours at a time. But yeah, so we usually meet at...
We're waffles. Yeah. Very also, we often meet in the middle of the day. I'm like, oh, I've got to go pick up my child now.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's your problem. I don't have a child.
you don't have that child. Yes, but we've been going for art centres. Maybe we'll end up like Box Hill Community Art Centre next or something. Like we just do a tour.
Box Hill, that's nowhere near either of us.
No, I
But
know.
that'd be
But
fun. It's part of
we
the
just do
adventure,
like art centres. We've done Abbotsford Convent. And yesterday wasn't an art centre.
Yesterday was the Arbory next to Flinders Street. That was just convenience.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we meet in public settings and then we sort of talk about the work basically. So our first session, I was just like introducing the concept to Sarah and showing her essentially like what I'd done and how it's developed since the initial excerpt that I sent through to Next Chapter.
Which is a lot. You've developed a lot.
Yes, that's true. It had changed a lot by the time that Sarah had seen it, and it's since changed again a lot.
Yes.
So, it's exciting.
Yesterday I was like, you haven't given me enough to work with. Like, it's starting to get too polished. Like, I can't nitpick enough. So I'm looking forward to the next chunk. Because I was like, oh, I don't feel like I'm giving you value because like it's actually pulling together quite nicely now.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's nice to hear that.
It sounds like you're finding you kind of had these conversations at the outset about what you both wanted, expected, could offer, and then beyond that, you're kind of feeling it out a little bit to see what's most fruitful when you get down into the nuts and bolts together.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I thought there would be more email correspondence, but I think we are relying a lot on those kind of face-to-face meetings.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I'll just ask one more question before we move to our next pair. And I'm interested in the mentorship outside the work itself, potentially, and very conscious that graphic novels are kind of an underrepresented, under-resourced part of the Australian publishing industry, some might say. And I'm just interested in sort of whether you've talked about that and how much kind of general discussion about the industry and guidance on industry like directions has come into your conversations.
think the first one we had a pretty broad conversation about that stuff.
Yeah.
The second one was kind of just the work.
It was very work focused. And then yesterday I
I
specifically marked out some time because I wanted to talk to you about that because it's getting to the point of the year where I'm starting to think about next steps after this year and where I want to take it. But yeah, so we did talk about like the realities of publishing and pitching and everything, which I know that Sarah has like a lot more experience of than I do, which is another reason that I wanted you as my mentor. But yeah, so I picked your brain about that. We sort of talked about it. I mean, what were our conclusions?
Well, locally there are some very supportive publishers, but realistically there's a very limited market, and the market is mainly driven towards like works that can be sold to school libraries. That is that kind of context. So,
it's maybe a bit more sort of like, target audience skews younger. Maybe it's a bit more like YA focused or YA adjacent. At least that's my impression of. Yeah. Everyone
wants another Raina Telgemir, But your work doesn't sit in that market.
No, that's one way to put it.
And so we do have to look further afield. We have to look to the US and Europe in terms of pitching. Maybe through the program you might meet a good match in terms of a publisher, but we can't see much in terms of potential locally at the moment for the work.
I guess we'll see. I'm definitely open.
We were kind of brainstorming some unusual angles locally in terms of, but I think the focus will be on pitching overseas, and and this is part of the developing thing. I mean, 10 years ago we wouldn't be able to even talk about publishers that would take on graphic novels locally. So it's very exciting that we can even like talk about people who might take on a graphic novel. So do you have any other feelings about?
No, I mean I'm just not sure. I mean, I don't really have like I have impressions, but I don't really have experiences. Do you know what I mean? So my impression is that all of this is true, but I guess like that will either be confirmed or denied by my experience when I start actually interacting with publishers eventually, I guess. But like we were talking about, I feel like based on my understanding of like the general audience and the general sort of like what publishers here are looking for in terms of like the graphic novels that they want to publish, I don't know that my stuff is really good fit for that because it's just gross. Like that's like the easiest way to describe it is that it's like pretty gross. So yeah.
I think, that mixture of being optimistic and ambitious for the work and for opportunities, but also being kind of pragmatic and realistic is something that a lot of artists grapple with, and how much to be optimistic and how much to be pragmatic, and having someone else who's in that state with you and figuring that out with you is a really wonderful thing that a mentorship can bring. Let's turn to our next pair now. And we'll come back and kind of open it up to everybody a little bit later. But next we have Cherie and Timmah. So Cherie Minniecon is a proud Yorta woman based in Naarm with her husband and 2 daughters. Cherie is a social worker, educator and future strategist. She is passionate about the exploration of the narratives we tell ourselves about the future and how they impact our sense of agency and ability to affect social change. She has a particular passion for exploring and providing platforms for First Nations perspectives globally in relation to futures thinking and creating Indigenous futurisms. And Cherie was a 2020 Signal Boost participant. Next to Cherie is her mentor, Timmah, one of her mentors. Timmah Ball is a non-fiction writer, researcher and creative practitioner of Balladong Noongar heritage. In 2018, she co-created Wild Tongue Zine for Next Wave Festival with Azia Kulpinska, which interrogated labour inequality in the arts industry. In 2016, she won the Westerly magazine Patricia Hackett Prize, and her writing has appeared in a range of anthologies and literary journals. Hi, Cherie, and hi, Timmah. So I'm going to ask you a few of the same questions and kind of tease out a little bit about your experience together. Cherie, can you tell us a little bit about why you applied for Signal Boost and what you were interested in? So Signal Boost is a program for emerging audio makers. Maybe just tell us a little bit about what you were interested in making in terms of audio and creating that space.
I was looking, I had committed to sort of like a year of experimentation. I had been at home with 2 young children, and then I'd faced a pretty serious health battle, and I kind of got at the end of that and was like, I've had all these ideas and all these threads of different kind of themes and areas that I'd had a lot of experience in terms of my work life, and I wanted to find a way to express some of those ideas creatively. And I saw the Signal Boost program, and you didn't have to have a project to work on to apply for it. So I knew I had all these complex ideas, and I knew that they needed to come out in storytelling, but I knew it needed to be more than just a written form, and the audio just attracted me to it. But I'm super technologically challenged and have no experience in audio whatsoever. And I actually didn't get in the program initially. Someone pulled out, and then I got in. And so I came in a little bit sort of already, like, I think of partway through kind of thing. So I just really wanted to put some support around me and try to find out the different ways that people were, especially around really complex ideas, how they were delivering them in really easy and accessible ways.
Yeah, beautiful. And so when you came in, you ended up with a split mentorship, and you had Timmah, and you were also working with Jess Fairfax as your technical mentor.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what appealed to you about each of them, and why you wanted to kind of have those 2 forms of support for different avenues of your work?
Yeah, the mentor, that process was really overwhelming for me, because I see mentorship as just like the facilitation of a relationship or a connection, and I think sometimes that person that helps you facilitate that connection, their role is really pivotal, because sometimes we focus on the relationship in terms of the measure of success, but sometimes that role that, say, Beth played, who was the one that sent me a list of potential people, is really crucial in the connection point. And she sent me so many amazing people, and I just got overwhelmed with it, to be honest. So it was a lot of conversations with Beth and John, and it was really hard, though, because it was during the lockdown. It was during, so I did get 2 mentors, but the technical really needed to be more, we needed to be able to catch up more face to face, so that was really difficult. But that was where my weakness was. Not that I'm like a super amazing writer or anything either, but but I thought, okay, audio I really need help with. But at the same time, it was Beth actually that said, I think you and Timmah, like, I think she had got to know me a little bit more as we talked, and she was just like, I think this is going to be a great relationship, and had those helped me to structure the ideas and bring some of those ideas that I was sort of the complex one, how to simplify them or express them. So that's how the Timmah got chosen. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And what ideas did you kind of particularly want to explore? Were there specific projects you wanted to work on?
I wanted to do a podcast called The Original Futurist, and I wanted the mentor to be Aboriginal. I mean, Jess isn't Aboriginal, but I knew that was a really core part in my selection process, because I needed someone to help me really remind me to stand in my sovereignty in my own writing and ideas as well, and so that was a really important factor in choosing that. In terms of the podcast that I wanted to create, it was, and I'm still in the process of creating, one thing the Signal Boost made me really think about was, there's so many audio conversational style podcasts out there, and just to really approach it in a completely different way. So almost like what I wanted to do was have a platform that explores futures thinking from our perspectives as Indigenous peoples, because I had done all these future studies training, and it was very, considering we're one of the oldest living cultures in the world, you would think how we've managed to do that would be explored in a futures sort of context. But sometimes I think we get stuck as being seen as belonging to an ancient past, and that innovative adaptability and foresight that's so strongly embedded in our culture is sort of invisible or not seen. So I kind of wanted the podcast to kind of showcase some of our visions for the future and how we understand even this whole idea of what a concept of future actually is. So still working on that.
Yeah.
But that was the project that I was trying to sort of like build while I was doing the Signal Boost program. Yeah.
And Timmah, what about for you? Cherie just spoke about why it was important for her to have an Aboriginal mentor. What did that mean for you as the mentor to be working with an Aboriginal mentee?
Yeah, it was like really powerful. Like I'm really reminded of our first time we caught up, which yes, in lockdown, so it was on Zoom or online. And I feel like the first hour was really talking about politics and culture and positioning ourselves and what it means to be working when, I don't know, your work exists in so many different contexts and has a lot, I don't know, like it just has a lot of ramifications, which, is very different to almost like the neutrality of working in a kind of like white space. And I think there's we'll talk a lot about how there's often more scrutiny and pressure. And that was like really incredible to sort of almost start from a position of, oh wow, I don't have to explain this, or Cherie doesn't have to explain this. We can just like almost debrief and strengthen each other by talking about cultural responsibility and also some of the pressures that come with that and complexities. And I was just really excited to kind of just sort of almost start this journey that wasn't really in that kind of like almost like Western timeline framing. We were talking a bit about this last night, where it was not like, my goal, I want to create the best podcast ever. I hopefully want to have it finished by December 2020 and hopefully gets picked up by iTunes. Like it wasn't this kind of, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's really exciting too. But I think there was a lot of us just, almost talking about cultural responsibility. And I was just really, I was like regenerated myself to kind of go, oh, that was so great to debrief about some stuff that was going on and to just feel like really safe together and to just be on the same page that creative development can be really slow. And we're both really happy to think very long term and not to rush what the final product or outcome is going to be. And more, I think for me, slow practice is really important.
Yeah, and I think that came out just with the way that, like, we never sort of even had set times to catch up for anything. It's just been like when needed, as needed, kind of very just intuitive and coming together and being okay that that's just going to happen. And then out of that has just spin off other little projects or other little, you know, like ideas and things like that. So it's never kind of felt like, oh, and then it ends here. It's just, other mentor program, like, you know, when I think back to my 20s, I remember doing mentoring and there was this very much, what are your expectations? What are you can... And we've had those conversations. Like, we definitely have those conversations, but it doesn't feel like that's the focus. It's like the relationship comes first or the other stuff. I don't know how to explain that, or that's clear, but that's what drives it. Like, sometimes you'll think you're going to call about something, but the conversation ends up completely different to what you were going to originally think, and we're kind of just go with that. Yeah.
I think for both these programs, something that we talk a lot about in relation to them is that need for creatives to have space that isn't purely outcomes focused, and that it's development time and it's space for thinking and talking and honouring that as being a really important part of a process, even if you're not putting pen to paper or, you know, pressing record. That's all part of the work, and rushing any of that generative those generative components it detracts from the eventual outcome. So yeah, giving space for that.
And
is
you
so
can
good.
feel the pressure though, even just being in a program that you know only lasts a year, especially if you know, lots of people are delivering around you that are in the because you know, I remember joining the program. I was the oldest in the program as well. I was the one that everyone's like, unmute yourself, Cherie. You know, I was that person, and yeah, really having to just be comfortable with the pace that feels right, and I think that's what was beautiful about having Timmah too. Like, I never felt this pressure of like, well, you know, you've only got me till like, it was just like that just was never there. So that was a really beautiful part of this, connection. Yeah.
And you did kick off during COVID. How much did that impact what you were able to do, how you were able to meet? Was it purely screen based for the first stages, or
we didn't get to meet face to face till
December.
the end of the
Or
year.
was
December.
it January? I don't know.
It was late. Yeah, it was late into the program. And some of the other participants were from different states, so they had to have more kind of like face to face catch up. So we caught up once face to face, and then pretty much the rest has been phone.
Yeah, phone,
emails.
email, online.
Yeah.
So
does that feel challenging, or is it just kind of a different medium to explore that dynamic?
I think we would have done a lot more like kind of workshopy stuff together I think we would have done more if we could have been face to face. Yeah.
So it was a lot of conversation.
I think there's something like I loved what you guys were saying that you meet at art centres, and I'm just like, or libraries. I'm like, I think we were talking about meeting at a library, but you know, COVID, life, everything. I think sometimes you can sort of really sit down and even like bringing materials and sort of playing a little bit more. But I think if you're like on the phone or just like on a Zoom, you just go into sort of different streams of conversation that are all connected. But sometimes, I don't know, it's less... Yeah, it is. There's different challenges. And I think sometimes email is really good if you just send me work and I can just technically provide feedback and prompts and stuff like that. Is a really good way to manage the fact that online conversations can often feel a bit nebulous and all over the place. But yeah, I also think it's kind of really nice to just be open to the fact that different layers kind of keep building into our relationship, which maybe wouldn't have happened if it was a very formal, we're meeting at a library for 3 hours once a month for 6 months or something like that.
And I think too, just because of the life challenge, you know, I was doing the program and my both kids home as well. So it was like, it was those extra challenges. It wasn't even just having to kind of connect online. It was, you know, you could meet one person. I think Jess was pregnant and she had a little one as well. So like even just trying to connect on top of, you know, so there were these other layers that were adding pressure than just connecting online, you know. And there was a real understanding in that from both Jess and Timmah, which again made that pressure of like, you know, it just allowed you to kind of be in the flow of whatever everyone needed to be in.
Yeah, beautiful. I might kind of open it up to everybody now rather than keeping you isolated in your pairs any longer. I'd love to hear from Sarah and Timmah about your own experiences when you were kind of coming up earlier in your careers, and whether you had any mentors or what support systems were really meaningful for you, and maybe, you know, what you might have taken from those that you've applied to your own experiences as mentors. Maybe Sarah, if you want to kick up.
Mostly my mentor-like relationships I've had have been informal. The successful ones have been informal. I did get an Australia Council emerging producer mentorship at one point, which was a year-long program. and that wasn't as successful, and that was for many reasons, and it was with an organisation, but sort of weirdly, I guess I was thinking that thing about ask culture and guest culture. Do you know that thing? Like some people have a culture of asking for things, and other people have a culture of, well, you expect other people to kind of guess how you're feeling, and the kind of politeness culture. And I think sometimes, in terms of the mentorship relationship, I've had issues with that. I come from more of a guest culture where I expect people to kind of, ask me how I'm doing, and maybe there's been kind of sort of issues around that sometimes. But the more fruitful relationships have been where I've kind of deliberately sort of would go to National Young Writers Festival once a year and kind of meet people through that. I lived in Tasmania sort of my formative years, and then moving to Melbourne, kind of deliberately kind of spending time around other comic creators. Yeah, because there's no formal way to kind of learn comics. So all you can do is kind of sit beside other people and watch them draw. And
now there is, though.
Sorry?
I'm doing it. Now there is.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot more structures now than there were, but still there's not a lot. So my more successful relationships have been those informal ones of just sitting beside other people and drawing. But more recently, during lockdown, I did kind of go, actually, I want mentoring. And how do you get it when you haven't got when you're kind of mid-career and you're like, well, I'm still learning. I still kind of need some mentoring. And I just turned to an artist that I knew and really respected and asked her if I could pay her, and that was a good sort of process that we had during the lockdown.
I think those informal relationships are a really interesting one, and I would love to come back to that shortly, because Mia and Cherie both had cohorts of other people going through the program with you at the same time. But first, Timmah, your experience with mentorships or mentors, or who kind of helped you, or what form did that support take for you earlier in your career?
Oh, look, it's just been so vital. I think for me, similarly, I've had the experience of formal and informal. I was really lucky to get a formal mentorship through Writers Victoria with the incredible Alice Pung. So it was just, a little bit intimidating to meet a writer that sensational and successful, but then really humbling to just realise just how dedicated she was and is to mentoring people, the huge amount of time she was prepared to give, and the fact that, that was like a formal kind of mentorship where she was paid. So it was a certain amount of time within, I don't know, it must have been like in 2017, I think, so quite a while ago. So I could like develop some work through that. But then beyond that, we've always stayed in touch. And I mean, she's just always doing such amazing stuff. But like, I don't know, almost like as a sort of just showing you that you can be a successful writer but balance it with so many other things. I think, that's been really incredible. But probably in a way, just as important, if not more important, is, informal mentoring, or having almost like a community of friends who are always happy to offer advice and support. And I think, friendships I've made through participating in things like Emerging Writers Festival, and attending different writers kind of launches and events, and just connecting with people has been so invaluable. Like people who are really happy for you to call them up, organise to go and get a coffee and debrief about something you're really struggling with. So I think the formal and the informal support, I don't know, I don't think I could do anything in a way without that, particularly the informal, almost like peer support of friends who are also writing and trying to do things and navigating things together has been invaluable.
Yeah, a friend introduced me to the term lateral mentor for someone who's kind of on a similar level or in a similar place to you, and I think in some ways that's just a fancy word for friend.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, okay, that's a friendship. Okay.
And it's an interesting one though too, because like about looking for a mentor, wanting to ask someone, especially when you're in sort of middle age or whatever. But I think there's actually a lot of people that want to mentor as well, and I think that's even kind of weirder to go up and say, hey, do you want to be mentored? Like, you know, if you're looking for mentees, you know, or whatever. But like, if you've got that capacity and you also want to give back the ways, you know, I think that naturally then happens in the spaces Timmah's talking about. It happens more that way because, yeah, I think it feels more natural in one way. I feel like there's something more acceptable of someone asking for a mentor versus like, yeah, going and asking if you want to be a mentor.
So tell me a little bit about both of your experiences with the other people who are in the programs, your respective programs with you and Cherie. That was mainly through weekly Zoom workshops.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of time on Zoom for you last year, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And Mia, you met the other recipients of the next chapter at Verona, as you mentioned, and have met again at Sydney Writers Festival, and then have also kind of...
I wasn't there.
Oh, you weren't there?
Yeah.
Sorry. It was terrible.
Oh, yeah, I heard everyone had a terrible time.
But I guess you've both had kind of these different spaces where you're brought together with these people, but then you also have the opportunity or the option to build that relationship into whatever you want it to be. Could you talk a little bit about what that's been like? Maybe Cherie, talk about last year and how you found that.
Yeah, I mean, the group was amazing. I really enjoyed the group, especially because of what everyone was going through. It just, I don't know, again, it where the things in the program weren't going quite right or whatever, it didn't seem to matter. Like, so yeah, we all connected really well, and everyone had such a different background and brought something different and had such a different focus. It just really enriched the whole program. We're all still in touch, all doing different things and at different stages, but that's fine. So yeah, even John and Beth were great. I don't think they're with the Wheeler Centre anymore, but they have kept in touch and happy to help out with anything. Always, you can call them up. So it's been great in that sense, in terms of that ongoing support and staying connected. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Mia?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think it's definitely been good overall. I said interesting like, oh my God, interesting. Like I'm dancing around the fact that I'm actually having a terrible time. Like, get me out of here. That's not true. No, I'm having a great time, everybody. I'm having lots of fun. It's been really valuable, I think. So everybody who's in the Next Chapter program it's like a really diverse selection of people and different kinds of writers and kinds of writing, right? We didn't meet until Verona, but just the one day that we had everybody together was so awesome. Just like everybody talking about the projects, and it was just. Yeah, I think I immediately texted like all of my friends, just being like, "This is awesome! Like, it's just so awesome being like in a room with a bunch of other writers. Everybody is doing completely different things, and all of it's awesome. Like, all of it is just like exciting and impressive. And everybody like really cares about their work and the work that and its quality. So I think that's been just psychically awesome to be part of. Like a peer group, who independently cares about their writing. Aside from that, I feel like just because we're all in completely different states, and everybody's kind of we're not all in different states, there's not that many states in this country, but many of us are spread across the country. And so we are mostly just sort of doing our own things. Yeah, so, and, I did have to miss out on Sydney Writers Festival, which I had a lot of FOMO about. That's fear of missing out. I had a very, outsider's sort of experience of that one when everybody was in the group chat talking about how fun it was, and I'm sort of sitting at home because I had a medical appointment that I'd been waiting months for. But yeah, no, it's been really nice. And I think another awesome thing is that there's like 3 people out of 10 this year who are gender diverse, of which I am one of. Surprise. So and that was just sick. We were all part of the same time slot at Verona. It's really nice just, I think, having other trans writers to talk about things with, like creatively, but also that we have like very different approaches to how we're sort of like talking about that experience and the degree to which sort of it is part of our work and all of that. So yeah, I think it's just been awesome.
Beautiful. I want to ask about the industry. I'm going to put it in scare quotes, whether that's the publishing industry or the audio making industry, radio. And I'd love to hear from anybody about those spaces and whether you think that they feel impenetrable or are impenetrable, whether they're risk averse or they're kind of becoming more open to new ideas filtering through. So yeah, if anyone would like to jump in with thoughts on that in relation to publishing or audio industries.
I'll jump in. I think what you framed it as, like, whether they're becoming more open-minded or if it remains risk-averse is really fascinating. I'm more familiar with, like, sort of publishing and literary cultures, but I can also see what's happening in, like, podcasting and even just radio. I think there is a huge desire to move away from the safe models of producing and the type of artists, writers that get opportunities to do radio shows or podcasts or books. That said, I think, it can still be really challenging to navigate these spaces. And I think a lot is happening and there's a lot more opportunity and things are really opening up. But I think, there's still definitely room to push things more. I was really surprised to hear from you both about the lack of opportunities for sort of graphic novels, and I thought there would be much more people really wanting to jump on board with things like that.
Why did you think that?
I don't know, like maybe it's because I'm not in that sector, and so to me it seems really exciting and vibrant and refreshing, and we all love kind of sitting down with a good narrative, and more we're so used to like visual content, so it just seems like the perfect time for that to be exploding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that logically all makes sense.
I would agree with that. But there's a lag, right? There's a, we're seeing growth in certain genres, so like medical genre, like sort of illness memoir, and the YA. Those are the two kind of really massive growth areas. And in the other genres, there's still kind of a lag. So that's where we're kind of at. We're still kind of playing catch up, and of course, it's still risky to publish and more experimental work. In any publishing sort of field, but. And there's still also an expectation, of course, which you would have in podcasting as well, that you just kind of do it online and you build an audience, and then you go to a publisher and they'll say, so what's your following, and have you got a market already? And you're like, why do I even need a publisher? Because you're already doing the marketing, and so then they're doing the distribution. So in the case of some comic artists now, some people are just self-publishing, like hardcover books, and paying a publisher to distribute.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the model some people have used. And then the publisher goes, oh, that's quite successful. We will actually publish you now, So people are looking at different models other than the traditional. Because we have to provide proof of concept, and before people will take the risk on the more unusual works.
And I think comics does work with like a different process as well. It's like difficult to submit like a comic manuscript in the same kind of way that you would with like a novel manuscript, for example. And historically a lot of comics have been episodic, so they've been published in issues. I'm not trying to do that, so I can't really speak on that. But I assume that would be.
And the market is not really moving away from those single issues, the sort of small pamphlet books, but other than zines, obviously. But we were just talking yesterday about the process of editing. Like when I did a residency overseas, and we were talking about within a non-fiction kind of context, but we were talking about. Pitching to a publisher in the US, these artists were US artists, and they were saying the publisher wants you to come with a completed book, and they just want to see if it's good or not, and then publish it.
which is kind of insane.
Yeah.
And considering the amount of work that is involved in creating a graphic novel, and
Let alone an 800-page
Yeah,
one. As
yeah,
yours
yeah,
is,
yeah,
Mia.
Yeah, well, 500, but yeah.
most graphic there's not really like again, the people have tried pitching 70-page books, and often the publisher will go, oh no, it's not long enough, it's not a graphic novel enough, so so it's got to be 100 pages plus. And to just produce that and then go, here you go. So, and I was saying, gave the example of a local publisher who is the reverse. They had the experience of having an artist come with almost complete work, and then they wanted to edit that, and then the artist had to rework many pages. And so that publisher now prefers to have works at thumbnail stage, and then they get the scope of being actual editors, and have that pleasure of and more control of the kind of narrative. So there's not many publishers that are doing it that way. So that's kind of, it's just interesting. How do you pitch when some want thumbnails and some want completed work?
That is fascinating. I could grill you about that all night, actually, but will restrain myself. But I would love to finish up. We're almost out of time. Love to finish up by asking Cherie and Mia what your advice would be for people who might be considering applying for the next chapter or for Signal Boost. And if they're thinking about it on the fence, don't know if their ideas are strong enough or if they've got enough experience, or if they're at the right place in their careers or their creative journey, what would your advice be to someone who's a little bit unsure?
Oh, just go for it.
Yeah, that's exactly my advice.
Yeah,
almost verbatim.
honestly,
Just do
I
it.
can remember, and Harry was a receptionist. I think it was Harry. I remember ringing him, going, I don't know how to even record. I had to do a pitch, and the word was public, and you had to what would you do a podcast on? And I actually recorded it on my phone, and I recorded that I would create a podcast about stories about what goes on in public toilets. And it was so random and and I thought, oh my God. And to be honest, I actually didn't get in. I came in because someone dropped out. So the pitch wasn't necessarily the best, but I got in the end. And I'm glad I took the punt. And actually it was Harry, the amazing receptionist here, that was the one that just went, just do it. And I'm so glad I did, because in terms of that whole industry, audio industry, it showed me so much. But also, what I loved about the program was it's really encouraged me to not do what necessarily is expected, and to think about, you don't need to do the podcast format in this way and how everyone's doing it. You can. So as much as I hear it all going on around me, some of the creatives that came on and just were doing such really interesting things and going against the grain was really inspiring.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that just give it a go and talk to people as well. I think I wouldn't have applied for this program if I wasn't pushed quite hard by one of my tutors last year, Tressa Leclerc, who has just been unbelievably supportive of my work. And she offered to write a letter of referral for me for the application process, so that was really awesome. But to be honest, I still didn't really expect to get it, really. I was very shocked when I got the phone call early in the morning in September or whatever. But I mean, yeah, because I'm making an edgelord furry comic, you know what I mean? It's very, I just didn't really expect anybody to really care about it, outside of the people that I already knew would care about it. So that really surprised me. And, and I'm also the first graphic novelist as part of this program. So there's always space for firsts is what I'll say. And I think there's, if you feel, and also that just being part of the program, the program is meant to be for works in progress. So just being part of it for the last 6 months plus the time that I had working on it before then, the project has developed so much. Don't apply thinking that you need a completely a completed sort of work. Just follow your instinct, go with your cool ideas and see what happens.
Yeah, don't underestimate your ideas.
Yeah.
Because, they might, because they're in your head and they've been in there for however long, just floating around, you do tend to underestimate the power of some of your ideas or your own creativity. And bringing them out into the world in some way, even if it's just through an application process. It's just, I don't know, it brings it to life just through that action, you know? Yeah.
Beautifully put. Thank you both. I love all that advice. I love that there's always room for firsts. I think that taps into, everything that mentorship and development can be, and that it's about what each rider needs, that there's no one size fits all. Thank you all so much for this beautiful conversation tonight. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Cherie. Thank you, Timmah. And thank you for watching. Remember, next chapter applications and nominations are open at the moment, actually, so you can apply online. They close at 5 p.m. on Friday, the 23rd of July. And Signal Boost applications are opening for the second year on Wednesday, the 7th of July, and they will close on Sunday, the 8th of August. So both of these amazing schemes are looking for 10 new recipients to take part in them. You can find plenty of information about them both online on the Wheeler Centre's website. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you check out all the other amazing Emerging Writers Festival events over the next few days, and good night.